All right, so Homer's Odyssey is, of course, foundational to the Western literary canon, right? That you've probably heard that Western civilization, or at least the Western literary tradition, was built off of two pillars, Athens and Jerusalem, where it was Hebrew faith and Greek reason that built our literary tradition, in addition to civilization itself, right? And with the Greeks, Homer is effectively seen as the oldest and the most foundational aspect of their literary tradition. That if you trace back all the sources and citations of all the great books and the great conversation, it all goes back to Homer, and there's not really anything that comes after him. A couple of older myths, but Homer's Iliad and Homer's Odyssey are the first written stories that we have in survival. So Homer's Odyssey, it's the sequel to the Iliad, and it's the ultimate hero's journey, right? It tracks our protagonist, Odysseus, on his way home from the Trojan War. And of course, the big hang-up is Odysseus inadvertently offends a couple of the gods, most notably Poseidon, and so what should be a smooth journey back ends up being 10 years of suffering and wrestling with gods and beasts and all of these crazy events. You have cyclopses and sea creatures, so on and so forth, right? But I really do believe that there's an actual hidden hero in the Odyssey, in addition to Odysseus, one that's often really overlooked, right? So what probably confuses people, especially your first time reading the Odyssey, is Odysseus is nowhere to be found for effectively the first 4 books or chapters. Instead, we find that the action begins back at home in Ithaca, where Odysseus is trying to get back to. And we see that his kingdom is in trouble, that his house is being ransacked by suitors who are trying to marry his wife Penelope. They're vying for his throne and his riches. So Penelope and Odysseus' son Telemachus are watching in vain as these 50 or 100 or so suitors just keep coming back every day, violating the sanctity of hospitality and host and guest friendship, and are just eating Telemachus' inheritance dry. And these first 4 books, they really focus on Telemachus, who, by the way, is effectively what I consider to be the hidden hero of the story, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense at first, because all that we see is this young 20-year-old boy who's effectively trying to stand up to the suitors, right? He's trying to tell them, hey, leave me alone, leave my house alone, get out of here. And everyone sort of laughs at him. They're like, what are you going to do, kid? And so you might wonder, well, why are we spending so much time on Telemachus? Why can't we get to Odysseus, right? Why can't we get back to all these cool sea adventures? Why can't we see the goddesses and the nymphs and the sea beasts? Why are we starting with this little kid? And the reason why is because Telemachus actually acts as the perfect foil to Odysseus. See, because Odysseus, as I said, is basically enacting the ultimate hero's journey, right? He begins his hero's journey by being called into an adventure by leaving his hometown to go to fight in Troy, which we see in the Iliad. And of course, the hero's journey is only completed once you make a successful return voyage home. So we see that Odysseus is now trying to complete his hero's journey and get back home to his family. And Telemachus, by extension, is a young man who is basically incapable of standing up to the villains and the forces of chaos in reality. So what he needs to do is he needs to begin his own hero's journey. And so we'll see this weird interaction play out between Odysseus' journey home and Telemachus' journey out, his coming-of-age story, that act as the perfect complement that really makes the Odyssey a masterpiece, that really makes it foundational. Because what you'll see in this interlock between father and son is not just a story on how to live an adventurous life or how to be a hero, but you'll actually see the sort of dynamic, this intergenerational dynamic that teaches you not just what it means to live meaningfully and to be a hero, but also how can you quite literally build civilization itself. So first, let's briefly discuss Telemachus' hero's journey. What does it mean for him to become a man? Well, Athena goes and shows up on Telemachus' behalf. She appears to him in the form of Mentor, who's this old man on the island, right? So she appears as this old paternal father figure, and she tells Telemachus, listen, you need to leave home and you need to go into a foreign land. We need you to go to the lands of Pylos and Sparta, where you can talk to kings Nestor and Menelaus. Why? Well, these two men, they were friends of Odysseus. They fought with him in the war, right? And so they might have some intel on whether or not your father is still alive. and you can find out if there's still hope. Can Odysseus actually still be on his way home to save the day? So this is effectively why Telemachus is called out to leave Ithaca, but at the same time, this is the beginning of his own hero's journey. See, for boys to become men, the hero's journey means that you must first be called to a foreign land, that you as a young man, you can't properly reach your true potential and your true sense of manhood while you are still living at home, right? Because men need to leave, they need to be away from their parents, they need to wrestle, they need to become competent and self-sustaining. And so what does this look like for Telemachus? How does he actually secretly become a man through this journey? Well, one, he's called to become a leader. He's called to lead an expedition, to lead a ship. 20 or so men, I think. So one, he's actually in charge of this crew, and two, you can think about the actual daring adventures that it means to travel the seas, right? In ancient Greece, piracy was a huge problem. So when you're braving the seas, you're braving the chance of running into marauders. Of course, this is ancient Greece, so there could also be angry gods or sea beasts out there. And of course, you could just be shipwrecked in a storm. So it's really like a perilous and dangerous journey. It's no joke to take to the high seas in ancient Greece. Yet Telemachus is called to lead a crew of men to go into a foreign land and speak to these foreign kings to inquire about his father. So on the one hand, he's learning these cardinal virtues, right? Fortitude, competence, strength, bravery. But when he also arrives at these kingly courts, he learns more of the political virtues too. He learns rhetoric. He learns good manners. He learns how to speak to the kings. And so what we find here is that he's also learning politics. He's building his thumos, his spirited nature, so that he can become a great-souled and magnanimous man. But he's also learning the more intellectual virtues. What does it mean to be a just ruler, a good ruler? How can I not just have the strength to lead, but how can I also lead with competence that men will want to follow me, right? He's being groomed for leadership. And so it's simply out here, this wrestling with destiny in a strange land that molds Telemachus from a young boy to a sort of competent young man. And we see when he returns home to Ithaca that this is more or less true. When he returns back to his house and basically yells at the suitors a second time, they start to actually respect him. They're like, wow, this guy's got some bass to his voice, right? They still want to kill him, don't get me wrong, but they can't help but begrudgingly respect him now because they see that he just carries himself with a bit more of a spirited nature to his being. But of course, and I'll give a little heads up that we'll probably have some spoilers here, but the real significance comes in the third act, effectively, in the third or the final part of the story when Telemachus arrives back to Ithaca and he reunites with Odysseus, who also safely makes it back home. And the two more or less conspire. How can we destroy the suitors? How can we rid them of our home? Because, of course, Odysseus can't even just walk back into his house. It's strongly implied that if he shows his face, the suitors won't welcome him, rather they will kill him. And you might wonder, well, why are these suitors so crazy and able to do this? Well, these are effectively all boys who were raised without fathers, because all of the fathers were with Odysseus in the war out in Troy. And all of them either die in the war or die on the return journey, thanks to Odysseus's, his questionable leadership, to say the least. So what we see with these men is they're vicious brutes who didn't have any father figures or paternal figures to help guide them into virtuous men. But Telemachus had that in a father figure of Mentor, who's really Athena, right? The Providence or the gods or heaven itself, calling him into a foreign land to become virtuous. And now his father is here to help him complete the cycle. So they come up with a plan, Odysseus and Telemachus, and they basically ambush the suitors. It's not so much of a battle as it is a one-sided slaughter, but what's important is what comes right after. See, after they kill all the suitors, Odysseus says, well, now we've got another problem on our hands here, Telemachus. We just killed 50 or 100 princes of Ithaca. They certainly have family and friends, and we're going to have enemies, so we have to learn now how to defuse the situation and defend our house from these invaders to come. And what's interesting, though, is he lays out the perfect plan, and then he leaves Telemachus in charge with executing it. He says, you execute the plan, Telemachus. I have to go and speak to my father, right? I have to complete my destiny and reunite with Laertes. So this is a really significant aspect of the story here, because what we're seeing is not just that Telemachus is an errand boy, but it really is a figurative passing of the torch that, as of right now, Ithaca is a kingdom in peril, and it's still in chaos, and Telemachus is the one who is charged with restoring order to the house of Odysseus, restoring order to the throne, which by extension will restore order to the entire polis of Ithaca. And to really sort of wrap it up here, Telemachus does just that. He executes the plans to a T. He rallies the forces. He cleans up the mess of the suitors. He arms the defenses, and he gets Odysseus' house back in order. And they're able to successfully defend it from the second wave of suitors' family and friends who are trying to avenge them. So it's more or less around here where the Odyssey comes to an end. There's a few other details I'm skipping, but the whole point here is Telemachus is really what makes this story a masterpiece, that it really transforms it from just a fun coming home story to a story about what does it mean to build civilization? What does it truly mean to be a virtuous man? See, because of course, again, if we start with Odysseus, who is the main character, like, don't get me wrong, he is the main hero here, but if Odysseus just comes home without Telemachus in the picture, all you have is a hero who comes home and slays the suitors and can maybe enjoy the last few quiet years of old age with his wife, but once he dies, Ithaca will fall into chaos, right? It's not so much of a happy ending, more as it is one man gets a few years of peace before civilization falls apart. But what you see with Telemachus is that he becomes the true legacy of Ithaca, and by extension, he becomes the blueprint that really taught ancient Greece what does it mean to build a civilization, right? Because again, Homer, if he's the primordial author of Western civilization, he's asking the first questions. What does it mean to be virtuous? What does it mean to live a meaningful life? And we see through the Odyssey specifically the greatest maturation of virtue, which will effectively develop later on into the wellsprings of Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, right? The great intellectual tradition that really discerns through the use of reason. What does it mean to take action in accordance with virtue and flourish? And what's so foundational is the Odyssey transcends and develops one of the great virtues of the ancient world, right? The great virtue, arete, of the Iliad was glory, right? To be like Achilles, to be a great killer of men so that you leave behind a legend and people sing about your name for ages. And the Odyssey basically challenges that. They say, well, is there any real legacy in a glorious name? You actually see Achilles in the underworld in the Odyssey, and he says, woe is me that I ever died young, right? I'd rather be a humble, poor farmer than to be a king of the underworld, right? He says, this selfish glory is nothing but vainglory, right? It's vanity. That having an immortal name means nothing. But what we see in this whole Odysseus-Telemachus interplay is a true and lasting legacy, because Odysseus' great glory isn't just that he makes it home and completes a full hero's journey, but rather he passes on the throne to his next of kin, that he can settle away now, and that the torch of civilization can live on through Telemachus, who can not just tell Odysseus' story, but effectively carry the wisdom, the wit, and the virtue of being a just and wise ruler that Ithaca can flourish. And this is more or less what the ancient Greeks realized, right? That for them, Homer was their education. If you were an ancient Greek man, you came of age and you learned what it meant to live a good life by listening to Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And so you were internalizing this idea that, the best legacy to live is to lead such a virtuous life that you instill virtue into your next of kin, that they can continue on carrying your wisdom into the next age, right? Your true legacy is the very hearts, mind, souls, body, blood, and flesh that you leave behind in your next of kin. And effectively, then, you're starting to learn through the Greeks how to look up beyond yourself towards a more transcendental and greater reality that lives on through your next of kin, that you learn a love of neighbor that truly builds civilization. And hence, Homer becomes the very blood, bones, and marrow of the Greek tradition that helped build Western civilization. So, yeah, that's more or less what I had prepared today, and that's why Telemachus is considered the hidden hero of the Odyssey, as far as I'm concerned. So I appreciate you for listening. If you enjoyed the video, of course, please like, comment, and subscribe. It goes a long way in helping this small channel here grow. And of course, if you want to go deeper, I do have a few other sources. I've got a Substack. I'll link that below. I do 2 full-length articles a week on the great books and thinkers of the West. I also have a Twitter. And of course, if you're a Christian man, I'm looking to get in touch with either your faith or your fitness, I am a personal trainer. I'm taking on clients at the moment, so I'll link to my website as well. But yeah, appreciate it, my friends. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.